investigating the stories that matter to you. Live from Columbia in high definition. This is WIS News 10.
Close to 2,000 people gathered at the State House Saturday as two very different groups hosted rallies there. Some groups present included a chapter of the Ku Klux Klan, as well as several black separatist groups. Now, there was a very heavy law enforcement presence. 11 agencies total were there for crowd control, including spotters on rooftops. Several protesters clashed during the KKK rally, causing isolated fights and heated exchanges. 5 people were arrested, 1 for disorderly conduct, 2 for simple assault, and 2 for breach of peace. South Carolina Department of Public Safety Director Leroy Smith released a statement saying, quote, "We want to thank the multiple law enforcement agencies involved today for an excellent response and for assistance in keeping protesters and those on the ground safe during the rallies." The atmosphere at the State House was tense for much of Saturday afternoon. WIS's Mike DeSumo was at the rallies and has more on what happened, plus the reactions from the crowd. Friday marked 1 month since the deadly massacre that claimed 9 lives at Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston. Since then, people from across the state and the entire country have continued to visit Mother Emanuel to pay their respects and honor the lives lost. While the congregation and the city continue to deal with the pain, many say part of the healing begins with unity.
To grow stronger together. Tomorrow is never promised to us. We take a lot of things for granted, but no one would have ever imagined anything of this nature to happen in the house of the Lord.
Even though it's 1 month after, it still seems like it was yesterday, honestly. And I think it feels like that for the whole city. You got a lot of tourists in and out, so it might kind of feel different, but for the city, it's still right here, it's still fresh, and it still hurts.
It's deeply moving. I'm touched by how the people in Charleston came together. I think it's an incredible example for all of us.
Many say the healing and closure following this tragedy will not come easy as Charleston remains a community in recovery. New this morning, we're learning more about the final moments before a private plane collided midair with an F-16 earlier this month. The crash happened around 11 o'clock in the morning on July 7th, and a preliminary report from the NTSB confirms that a distress call from the pilot of the F-16 went out at 11:01 a.m., and then there was no further communication. The two planes collided shortly after the Cessna took off from Berkeley County Airport in Moncks Corner. The report shows the jet continued to fly for 3 minutes after that crash before the pilot ejected. Both aircraft were destroyed, and the pilot and passenger in the Cessna, father and son, Joseph and Michael Johnson, were both killed. The F-16 pilot, Major Aaron Johnson, landed safely. A cause of that crash hasn't been determined. The family of the alleged Chattanooga shooter is speaking out. The Abdulaziz family released a written statement Saturday saying their son had long suffered from depression. The family then went on to express their deepest sympathies to the families of the victims and to everyone affected by the tragedy. 24-year-old Muhammad Abdulaziz opened fire at a military recruiting center in Chattanooga on Thursday before going to a nearby military facility where he engaged in a gun battle. 4 U.S. Marines were killed Thursday. A 5th victim, a Navy sailor, died early Saturday morning. The Abdulaziz family says they are cooperating with authorities and they'll continue to do so. 2 deputies in Sumter County are on administrative leave after a shooting Saturday morning left 1 man in the hospital. Investigators say deputies were responding to a domestic disturbance on Colts Run in Dalzell around 10:15 Saturday morning. When deputies arrived, they say 39-year-old Michael Dinkins was physically aggressive. Authorities say deputies deployed their tasers, but Dinkins tried to take one of their guns. That's when both deputies fired at him. Dinkins was airlifted to Palmetto Health Richland, and he was last reported to be in stable condition. Dinkins faces several charges, including domestic violence, resisting arrest, and assaulting a law enforcement officer. The incident remains under investigation by SLED. Columbia police are investigating a stabbing from Saturday morning. This happened at Booker and Carver Streets. Police say a possible suspect has been identified, but there's no word on the condition of the victim or the circumstances of the stabbing. If you have any information that can help investigators, you're asked to call Crime Stoppers at 188-CRIME-SC. The White House condemned an ISIS attack in Iraq Friday that left over 100 people dead. A White House official called it yet another painful example of ISIS atrocities. The suicide car bombing took place at a market celebrating the end of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. Officials said at least 170 people were wounded in the attack. Today, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu continued to attack the nuclear deal signed last week between the West and Iran, saying Iran deserved no concessions until it changed its policy and ceased its calls for the destruction of the U.S. and Israel. Yesterday, Iran's supreme leader said the historic nuclear deal won't change Iran's policy toward the, quote, arrogant government of the U.S. Netanyahu called the leader's speech aggressive and confrontational. He said the speech proves that Iran will not change in spite of concessions from Western countries. Kenya's Westgate shopping mall reopened yesterday, nearly 2 years after a massacre that killed 67 people. Gunmen from a Somali militant group held out for 4 days there as security forces laid siege to the complex. Security was heightened for the mall's reopening. President Obama is due to visit the Kenyan capital in just a week. 4 people were killed and 8 others injured when a 5-story building collapsed in India's capital, New Delhi, late Saturday night. Officials are carrying out a rescue mission today as many are still trapped under that rubble. Reportedly, the building caved in as an addition was being made on the 5th floor of the building. Heavy machines were deployed to clear the debris. Most of the victims suffered head, leg, and hand injuries and were rushed to a nearby hospital for treatment. The cause of the collapse is
Yes, News 10.
The New York Times has released portions of a deposition from a 10-year-old court case against Bill Cosby that reveals he paid women to hide his affairs. According to the transcripts, Cosby admits to having sexual relationships with at least 5 women and paying one of them to hide the affairs from his wife. Cosby says those relationships were all consensual. The 78-year-old entertainer also discussed his philosophy on sex, claiming he tried to avoid it because he didn't want women falling in love with him. Cosby has never been criminally charged and has vehemently denied wrongdoing. Donald Trump's under fire again this morning after making inflammatory comments during a campaign event. The 2016 presidential candidate's latest remarks caused an uproar after he insulted Senator John McCain.
GOP frontrunner Dan Sheneman, NBC News.
Up next, we'll check back in with Vaughn Gaskin for a final check of your first alert forecast.